So in today's workshop, I just want to introduce you to common plants that have a long history of being used as home health agents that help us. And we'll talk a little bit about each of these. And if there's any counterindications, I'll try to remember them. So counterindications are things that we need to be concerned of, like if we're using the plants. And then definitely we'll make some products, because that's the other thing. So I started off by saying, learn a few plants. You don't have to know a lot. Like if you know 10 or 12 common plants that have a wide range of uses. In other words, you can use them when you have bronchial inflammation, when you have upset stomachs and headaches, etc. And they're effective for these things. So a lot of times when you're reading herb books, they have long lists of what these plants do, and sometimes they're secondary. Like if you had nothing else, you might use this, possibly it might work. You try it, doesn't work at all, you lose faith in the plants, right? So, I want to share with you primarily herbs that I feel are really impactful for certain situations. It would be unusual not to have a positive effect when you're using them. Generally, what I find with people when they're trying plants, it's either that they don't use them in sufficient amounts. They're worried, like, will this have a bad effect if I take too much? Or so it's not using sufficient dosages and not using them for the length of time that they'll be impactful. So that's really what I find. Are herbs effective? Absolutely. They would have been discarded by human beings thousands of years ago if they didn't work. And in fact, what we get today is, and it's still happening, is this distilled information that's been passed down for centuries through generations, and it's what really works. And today, we see a lot of some of the old things that really didn't work, that we would call really kind of folk tales or whatever, which oftentimes folk tales are really true. But a lot of those things have been discarded. And we're doing the same. We're distilling the best of the information and passing it on. That's what tradition is, right? It's a living kind of art that gets refined through generations and passed down. So, today in the 2024, we have such amazing information, a lot of it based on empirical evidence, which means basically people have used it on themselves, found it effective, passed it down, and also scientific research validates a lot of what people have known about plants. So we do have a lot of science and scientific research, some of it really valuable, that's passed down. Very little of it done in this country, but a lot of it done in Asian countries and in European countries, like in Germany. And so then the second thing, of course, is using the plants. And so I just like to show people all the various different ways that we can use plants as herbal medicine in our home. So let's just start with some of these plants. And we're going to start with, I think it's really odd. So I do want to share, oh good, are we in Prunella? Oh yeah, so this is a good one. So this isn't really the slideshow I prepared for this class. I sent that to Janelle and Benjamin, but they're really busy now. And I thought I put this one, I just brought this as a backup, but it has a lot of really other interesting slideshows. So this one will have some good plants we can look at. So. I don't even know what's on this slideshow, but anyway, we'll see. So this is Prunella vulgaris. You all have this growing. If you have a yard and a garden, but even if you just have a lawn and you don't have a garden, you have this plant growing in your garden. It's called Prunella vulgaris. That's the botanical name. I like that name, Prunella. Make a nice name for a little girl, right, Prunella? Vulgaris, not so good. You wouldn't want to call anybody vulgaris. But I also like that as a botanical name because vulgaris means common. It means readily available. So this is a small mint. If you look closely at it, you can't see it from this slide. Can you even see that slide? Yeah, you can, kind of. So if you look closely at this plant, it has the distinctive features of a mint. So all mints have what? Square stems and opposite alternating leaves, which means on one side of the stem you have opposite leaves, then you twist it and have on the opposite side of the stems, two leaves come out. So opposite alternating leaves. But what's the rest of that? Not all plants that have square stems and alternating leaves, opposite alternating leaves, are mints. You have to know the second part of it because there's a lot of plants like nettle, square stem, opposite alternating leaves, and it's not a mint. But mints are distinguished. So when you looked at this little plant, you see square stem, opposite alternating leaves, and then that very distinctive mint flower. But it's tiny because most of the time it's in your yards where you mow or pool. But when you let it grow, it can grow 2 to 3 feet tall and be very handsome, beautiful plant. It does not have the aromatic qualities that we see in a lot of our mints. So when you smell it, it's not, you know, there's not a lot of oils that are released. But this plant, common name is called self-heal or heal-all. So a plant that's called self-heal or heal-all has a lot of medicinal value. And when you look at traditional uses of this plant, this was a major plant used by European herbalists. It's not used in the United States very much. We mostly just mow it over and throw it out in the compost pile. This is a really amazing plant. First of all, it's very beautiful if you let it grow. And then it's a plant that's commonly used for boosting the immune system. It's not going to be as strong as a plant like Echinacea, but it's for like a tonic herb that you would use. You could drink it every day, you could drink it frequently, it has no harmful side effects. And it's used for boosting your immune system, for supporting respiratory health. So it'd be an herb that we would call a tonic medicinal plant. And I might explain that a little bit to you later about how you determine the safety of a plant. This would be definitely totally safe. There's been no recorded adverse reactions to using it. But I would say this is a plant that's completely overlooked in the materia medica of Western herbalists. So do you all recognize this little plant in your garden? Yeah, little tiny purple. Well, it has little tiny purple flowers because usually it's mowed over or pulled out. But as I said, if you let it grows quite robustly. It grows maybe 2, even 3 feet tall. It can grow very nicely. And it's definitely a really excellent medicinal plant that's just going to show up in your yard. So, and I do want to speak highly for the weedy plants, right? You know, so oftentimes we think of weedy plants as, you know, less than the things that you go to the store and you might buy in the herb shops. But a lot of these weedy species are the most popular common medicines used by people. And they tend to travel where people are. We find them in our gardens, in our disturbed soil, around towns and cities and empty lots. I'm not suggesting necessarily that we would harvest them from those places, but these plants grow near people because they're used by people, you know, like until very recently in history, they were not ignored. And many of the plants that we think of common weedy plants were actually packed and brought over here by the early settlers. They were chosen amongst the very few things that they could bring to the New World. They were selected to bring because they were their most potent medicine. That's kind of cool, I think. And then we have this one, which as I was kind of laughing that I would put comfrey in, because comfrey is, how many of you use comfrey? A lot of you have. So this is a very controversial herb, but only since around maybe the mid-1980s. It's actually illegal to sell this plant.
In Washington.
In Washington.
Yeah. It's illegal to buy. You can't get seeds shipped to Washington.
Yeah, you can't. It's.
I tried to.
Move it up, honey. Okay, great. Since you can buy it, it's.
A month ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can buy it, and you could go to herb stores and usually buy it, and you could usually get the seeds, but it's always marked unfit for human consumption. And but what I want you to know is that's very recently, since around the mid-1980s. And when I first started my herbal practice, I opened my herb store in 1972, I mentioned this yesterday, it's still on the main street of the small town I grew up in, Sebastopol, California. Still go to Sebastopol and walk into Rosemary's Gardens. It's been there for 50 years now, right? Yeah. It lived on even when I left, so it's nice to go back and visit that store. But this was probably one of the #1 selling plants in my store at that time. And also, it was one of the #1 plants used in Western herbalism. So you can go back to herb books that were written 500 years ago and find incredible uses for this plant. And also, it wasn't only used by herbalists, it was also used by our local farmers, like throughout all the Pacific Northwest and even up into Oregon. Farmers, like dairy farmers in particular, were growing fields of comfrey for cattle fodder because it enriched the milk. It was such a nutritive plant. So in the 1980s in Afghanistan, there was a famine, and a tribe of people, a fairly large community of people, didn't have much to eat, and they were foraging, and they were eating a plant, and it was related to the Comfrey, to this family, the Boreaceae family, with borage. There's many, many different members. Coltsfoot is a member of this family. So it's a large family. And they were eating a plant, and in eating that plant in large amounts, a number of people died in that village. And of course, the researchers and the healthcare professionals were very concerned. And when they did the research, they found it was related to that plant. That plant was high in paralyzidine alkaloids, which closed the venous vein to the liver, and so it created a terrible problem called paralyzidine poisoning in these people, and that's why they died. So they did researches on this plant of the families, and they found out that in some specimens of Comfrey, they found very small amounts of paralyzidine alkaloids in the root and the leaves. And so that's why they took it off the market. So this is a plant that's been used for thousands of years with no harmful side effects. And you would have to eat copious amounts to get even anything that would be harmful, but it was taken off the market. And the reason I think that's so just bad science, really, is because this plant is so healing. It's very high in calcium, it's very high in many, many minerals and trace minerals, and it's also very high in allantoin, which is essential for the healing the tissues of the body. So this herb has a long history of being used for healing injury to joints, ligaments, and bones. And I told this story yesterday, so I'm sorry that you hear it again, but I think the reason I've been such an advocate for Comfrey is, first of all, I believe that the science was warped. I just don't think it doesn't hold up, right? And the fact that nobody's ever died from using this plant, and it's been used in such large amounts, speaks, I think, very highly of the plant. But when I was in my young 20s, I was actually hit by a Harley Davidson doing an herb walk. I was finishing up an herb walk, and a young boy who'd borrowed a Harley Davidson, he was 16 years old, so he didn't even really have his license. He was speeding down a backcountry. I mean, how many people was run over by a Harley Davidson, right? It could have just been a Toyota or a Honda or something. It was a Harley Davidson, right? And he went around the corner, and there was a group of us, standing in the road, but it was a dirt road. It wasn't even a real road, and he slid out of control. And I will say, honestly, I'm grateful he ran into me and no one else, but I ended up with very severe broken leg. I had compound fractures in my right leg, and my leg was mashed, actually. I spent 18 months in a cast from that. But my doctor was adamant with me. He just would say, Rosemary, there's nothing you eat that's going to make any difference. Your leg is mangled. And I look at him, I was 26 years old or something, and I was a little ornery, right? I don't believe you. My herbs are going to work for me. So we fought for 18 months, right? Because he just insisted I was going to have another surgery. But really, it took 18 months. And this is the plant. I ate this plant. I tell you, if anybody was going to die of PA poisoning, it would have been me. I would have been the candidate for it, because I ate it every day in copious amounts. I juiced it, I steamed it, I made tea with it, I used the root, which is supposedly higher in PAs, I used the leaves. But you can't base it on one person's safety by any means, but really, as I said, it has a long history of safety. I always like to assure you, if you are new to herbalism and that kind of information makes you worried, don't use the plant. It's not, you don't want to take things that you're concerned about. There's so many other plants that you can use, but I do want to say that Comfrey is a great plant to have on hand. Topically, there is no concerns about using it. So it's an excellent herb to use for poulticing. Have you ever poulticed with this herb if you have a bad sprain? Do you have a story to tell about it? I mean,
my mom did that to me when I was a kid. I don't know why. She was always making Comfrey poultices and putting it out.
Yeah. So it's not like a plantain poultice that will draw poisoning out. It's a mucilage. It's soothing, and it also helps to heal the joints and muscles and ligaments. It's used as foot baths, so and it's a very common herb that's used in salves. So you have a wide range of use. It also makes incredible compost. So if you're just growing it because it helps to restore your soil and makes compost, that's a great reason to grow it. But I've become I'm a preacher for Comfrey, right? I'm like, I want to go down in history of saying that I don't really have any answers for anyone else, but for myself, I feel this is an absolutely vital herb to have growing. Yeah. Yes.
I feed it to my dairy goats. They inhale this stuff, but I make poultices when my horses get mud fever or scratches. which is a real bad bacterial infection on their skin and their lower legs. I made a salve with this and tea tree oil in it and pasted on there, and the scabs were real big and you couldn't touch them. They're real painful, and 3 days later you take it off and it's off the skin.
That's because the skin actually helps regenerate the skin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has that oil.
Incredible how well it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason I think that I just feel like it's good to share the other part of that story with you, because this is an herb that just has so many great uses, right? But here's the warning. I would say here's a real counterindication that you should pay attention to. Is it's impossible to eradicate comfrey once you plant it in your garden. So, and even if you're digging the root out, like let's say you want the root medicine, because the root and the leaf have almost identical constituents, but the root is stronger than the leaf. So if, as medicine, the root has more mucilage, more allantoin, and more of the minerals and trace minerals, but the leaf is also really valuable. So if you're trying to dig that root and maybe you want to move it out of your garden because it's so immense and giant, you'll hardly ever be able to get it out of your garden. In fact, I was in a garden class one time just listening. I was a student in a class, and a woman said, like, my comfrey's died and what should I do? And everybody said, how'd you do it? So that would be the one thing. And actually there was an organic herb farmer in Washington, Trout Lake Herb Farm. It was one of the first organic herb farms. It was very large. And they had planted a field of comfrey, and then they wanted to plant Echinacea in that field, and it was impossible. They could never get the comfrey out of that field once it was in there. So
their roots are about 18 feet long.
Yeah, they get really big. So
It regenerates the soil. If you have dead dirt, you can plant it, and it helps bring the goodness from down under back up to the surface.
A useful plant that I don't have to worry about.
Right, exactly.
And then we saw this plant yesterday on our walk. I picked it because it's growing beautifully down in the valley down there. I knew I'd find it, right? Just because it's habitat, and we'll talk about that when we're doing that herb walk. But you just kind of learn where plants are in habitats, kind of like with people. You kind of know, looking for certain kind of people, to either go church or herb gatherings or whatever it is, and you're going to find your tribe, right? So you learn that about plants as well. So I had my sister yesterday drop me off, and I just walked a few feet, and there it was, these big nettles. So there's always a fun game with herbalists. Like if you had to choose one plant, which is really impossible because every single plant we're going to look at, I love these plants with my heart. But this is, if I had to choose one plant, it's this, and this is nettle. And the reason I love nettles so much is up again. Okay, the reason I love nettles so much is because it's so delicious. So people who don't like a lot of greens, or if you have teenagers who are just not eating their greens, this is a really delicious green. You have to know how to prepare it, right? Because it's very high in formic acid. So on the stems and under the leaves, it has little needle-like protrusions that are filled with a liquid juice. And that liquid is formic acid, the same thing that bee stings have, actually, and ants. Ants have it also. If you ever been stung by an ant or bit into an ant, you'll get that formic acid. And it causes welts, and actually they can create pretty bad welts, right? But that formic acid is also very medicinal. It was an old treatment for people who had bursitis and arthritis or really stiff joints. So doctors and herbalists would do what's called urtication. It actually has a formal title called urtication. And people still do it, but I'm not recommending that you do it. It's a little bit of a painful treatment. I try to do my treatments a little bit nicer than this, but it does work, right? So you just bundle up the nettle, and then you would kind of tap that area, and it gets swollen and hot, and then really literally in a day or two, that formic acid starts an antihistamine reaction in the body, and it actually makes that area better. So that was an old method, and I think Elizabeth said that she still does urtication all the time. I have a friend who has a lot of scalp issues and is losing hair, and she does urtication on her head, Brigitte Mars, yeah. And her hair has just grown back beautifully. So again, not suggesting you do this, I'm just telling you. Herbalists tend to be a crazy lot, which is one of the reasons I love us so much. But for those of you who are looking for a super nutritious foraging food, this is just delicious. And you have to steam it well, but it makes the best spanakopita. One of my favorite recipes, so I make it like a Greek spinach pie with it. I don't even put spinach in it, just solid nettle. and feta cheese, and that wonderful phyllo dough. The other thing I love doing is making nesto, which is a raw nettle pesto, right? So when you steam nettle, when you dry it, and when you break it up, like put it in a blender, it destroys the needle-like hairs. And so you don't get those welts. So you can just put it in a blender. You can add a little bit of basil if you have it, or oregano or thyme, because nettle by itself just tastes really green. So you might want to flavor it. Put your garlic and your walnuts or pine nuts if you can afford them, and just make like a regular. Yeah, right. Who can afford them? Walnuts and cashews is what I usually use. Anyway, so yeah, you can eat it that way. But then, as a medicinal plant, this is one of your major medicines, and it's a very safe medicine. The only counterindication is that sting, right, which can be healing and medicinal. So it's an herb that's actually used for several major systems of the body as a major herb. So reproductive system of women and men. It's a tonic herb when used this way. So it's not going to necessarily heal major issues, but it's an herb that will help to build and restore parts of your body. So it's really excellent for that. It's excellent for liver and digestion, and it's excellent for the respiratory system. So a primary herb for all of those systems of the body. And so you'll see it in a lot of different formulas. Extremely high in calcium, high in vitamin A, high in trace minerals. In fact, a lot of people I know will dehydrate it. Like they'll take fresh nettle and make a really super strong tea and then dehydrate that, or if you have you can run it through a juicer. And when you dehydrate it into a powder, it tastes like salt. It really literally tastes like salt because it's so high in trace minerals. So it's very, very high in trace minerals, which are oftentimes missing in people's diets. So yeah, just a super great herb for so many things. And as I said, the counterindication is the sting. I mentioned this yesterday. One of the things I love about nettle is that it does remind me of a menopausal woman. It's like really nourishing, really good for you, but you better treat it right or it's going to reach over and go, I've had enough. Call it like a little bitchy nettle. But several menopausal women came up to me afterwards and said, I know just what you're talking about. Yeah, I've been there. I know too.
Can you get seed for this?
Well, so that's another thing. Let me share this with you. The question is, Mel asked, can you get seed for it? Well, you can, but you can also just collect seeds, actually. So in about another month or two, the early stands of nettle will start producing seeds. And those seeds are collected as they don't have the sting to them, so they're very easy to collect because at the base of the plant there's a big cluster of seeds. They're tiny, but they're very, very high in protein. They're nutritious, and they're also a really excellent tonic for men and women. And the root is been shown, has a long history, but it's also been tested, so you can read the scientific studies, are really excellent for men with prostate issues. And most older men over 60, 55, 60 start naturally having prostate issues. So, less strong urine flow, that will be the first early signs. Sometimes a little swollen prostate, little balls down there start to, so this is a really, really good herb for older men to start using, is the nettle root. And it's so easy to gather. You can buy it, it's expensive, but you can just gather it yourself. And it's made into teas and tinctures, there's powders and capsules. So there's so many different delivery ways that you can use herbs that make them more available for you.
Does juicing it remove the stinging?
And juicing removes the stinging, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
I have it everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and this is another thing. A lot of you like to grow, you learn about these plants, you want to breed them close. So I do want to give you a little warning about planting nettle in your yards. First of all, you want to make sure that your partner loves the wild plants as much as you do. Yeah, so because once you plant nettle, it's really hard to eradicate it. It spreads through runners and it spreads through seeds, and it really, really, once you welcome it, it really, really moves in. So, you want to be careful who you invite in your neighborhood. And nettle, I love it, but I like to go collect it in other people's neighborhoods. I have grown it in my own, and my husband, who some of you have met, he's a really kind man, and he tolerates all of my eccentricity very well, but he does not tolerate the welcome of nettle in your yard. And I actually really am very respectful, because one of my marriages did end when my husband cut down the nettle. was like, I looked at dear Carl and I said, honey, I don't think this marriage is going to last. So you have to be careful.
My husband mowed down a patch the other day in the way, and I was like, he's like, don't worry, there's 500 other patches right here. Okay. I don't want to walk through it.
Yeah.
Rosemary, I feel like I've heard
No divorce.
people say, like, don't harvest the plant once it's a certain size.
Well, yeah, so you hear that. So as the plant gets, so that's a really good point, and it was in my mind to bring it up, so thank you. She's asking, so I've heard that you shouldn't harvest it once it reaches a certain age. So generally, it's always best, it tastes the best, it's the best for you when it's young and fresh before the tips, before the seeds develop. So I would say that's true, and why that is because the minerals get so developed, and when you have that concentration of minerals, it can be irritating to your kidneys. You would have to eat a lot of old nettle, but I want to say in a survival situation or in a foraging situation, you can eat those old plants. I mean, I've spent a lot of time backpacking and horseback riding and eating just wild plants, and half the year the nettle is old, and I've just, I dine on it. So when I have a choice, I'm going to pick it fresh and young. If you have a good patch, the secret is once the patch has reached maturity, before it goes to seed, cut it back, and you'll get a second, and in a climate like this, you'll get a third harvest from your nettle. Yeah. And then I did want to mention, I didn't share this recipe yesterday, but another way that you can preserve fresh nettle through the winter is pickling it. So right now when the tender greens are beautiful, you pick them, have your gloves on and your scissors and your basket so you don't get stung, and you collect them, and then you just take the fresh young greens and you put them in a quart jar and you cover with apple cider vinegar, and you can put garlic and cayenne peppers or whatever you want in there, or just plain, and you let it sit for 4 to 6 weeks, and you have this delicious raw non-stinging pickled nettle. So you can store it that way all over winter. So I do like half-gallon jars of and then you have a nettle vinegar right in there. You have like an herbal vinegar that you can then use in salad dressings or whatever. So it's another old recipe that you can do. And then let's see. And then this is another absolutely incredible weedy plant that grows in everyone's yard. Again, if you have a lawn and you let that lawn go for 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to find you have a virtual, really pharmacy, a safe, incredibly safe, good pharmacy in your yard. So everybody has plantain growing in their yard or in their garden. And this is the broadleaf plantain. We have 2 plantains, Plantain major, which is the wide leaf, and Plantain lanceolate, which is the narrow leaf. And they really have identical properties. It sort of depends. I really see more narrow leaf on the West Coast, more broadleaf on the East Coast. But you'll find both in both parts of the country. And you'll find this plant growing in temperate regions around the world. So it's commonly called poor man's footsteps or white man's footsteps or human's footsteps. Wherever people go, this plant follows. And it follows for a reason. For one thing, it's very restorative to compacted soil. So a lot of these plants I call the warrior plants. They go into areas like down here that's been, disturbed a lot, and it's very dry, and there's not a lot of good soil in there. And these plants will colonize, And so we oftentimes hear all the negativity about colonizers right now, right? But colonizers also can do really good things. So a lot of these plants move in, and they're restructuring the soil, and they're breeding up minerals from deep down, and they're actually healing the soil. So I like these kind of settlers. They're coming in and adding to damaged environments. And they also are really incredible medicine for us. So plantain is one of the major plants that we call a blood alterative, which basically is an old-fashioned term. It means it's very high in minerals and trace minerals that nourish and feed the blood in the entire body. And so this plant is I didn't mention this yesterday when we were looking at it, but it's one of my favorite plants for blood poisoning in the system. And so that can be topically, like, let's say you've got a piece of sliver, maybe a metal sliver in your hand, and you couldn't get it out, your finger gets really infected and it's really sore, and you can't dig that sliver out. You can do plantain poultices. I usually suggest in a situation like that, plantain poultices and also really hot salt soaks, right? So you're helping to kill that bacteria, and the heat draws out. But then you put plantain on, and if you do it, you might have to do it several days. but it draws out the toxins, and the plantain will actually turn black. It gets really dark and black when there's infection. You keep changing it and putting fresh plantain on, it will draw out the infection, and often will draw out those really deep slivers that you can't pull out. So it's common. Have any of you had that ever happen with plantain? No, it really works well for that. And then it also can be for internal poisoning as well. So I remember this happened years ago when I was still living in California. I had a student and her husband who'd both taken my herb program, and they lived way up the coast, 2 hours from the nearest hospital in Sonoma County. And they had been out working in the garden, and Raina, her name was, had stepped on a nail. And that's always serious, right? But they didn't do anything about it. They didn't go in, they didn't soak it in hot water, they didn't put herbal liniment on it. She just kept working in the garden. And that evening, as she was finished working, they were having dinner, she noticed, first of all, her foot was throbbing, which would be normal. And then she noticed that there were blood lines starting to move up their leg, and they were about, when she called me, it was around at her knee. And I was like, first of all, I wanted to scold her out of her mind, like, what in the world were you thinking of? This is horrible. But anyway, I had her husband, Jazzy, went out and had him gather plantain, make a really strong plantain tea, like super strong, to drink, and then also made a bath with hot water, salt water, and plantain in it. And just stayed on the phone with them, and in 20 minutes time, the lines started to recede and went down. And she took care of it after that. She never did go to the doctor, but she didn't get blood poisoning from that. So, and then I told this story yesterday. My husband was bit by a brown recluse spider, which are very serious bites. Actually, people lose limbs from it, or you can lose big sections of your skin. And the problem that happens with, you have them out here, so it's good to know, when you get bitten, you don't really think anything of it. You know you've been bitten by an insect, but it's not horrible. So his bite was like a normal bite, like an insect bite. But really by day 2, his arm had swollen up where it was freaky. It looked like his skin was going to explode. It was in his upper arm. So we took him to the emergency ward at the hospital, and they gave him antibiotics. So I think it's really important. He took antibiotics 1 round, but then I treated it with plantain poultices, and kept them on for it took about 3 weeks for the swelling to completely go away. So it was 1 round of antibiotics and plantain poultices every day, several times a day, and plantain internally and golden seal. But he totally was able to get rid of that, and he still has his arm. He can tell you the story. He's still good. So, and just to let you know, I know how serious those bites can be, and I wouldn't mess around with my husband if I didn't have absolute certainty that this plant and God would work. I did a lot of prayer, and I picked that plant with prayer. I picked every single of those leaves because, first of all, I believe in prayer, and also I was taught that, when you pick things with prayer and intention, the medicine comes up. All the traditional people in the world who work with plants will always say, when you ask for the plants, ask permission to pick, which is basically like asking prayer to pick, that the medicine, you get the medicine with the plant. So I think it's always important to have clear intention. And then also, I think in the next photo we'll see this. This is the top of the plantain is so pretty. It's like a little wand. It has these little hula girls, these little dancing flowers around it. And so these seed pods for foragers are really high in protein. You have to do a lot of picking, they're really tiny. I think you use more calories than you get picking them. But what's important to know is that they are a bulk laxative. And in fact, plantain, there is a type of plantain that's cultivated, and that's what they make metamucil with, is made from the cultivated plantain seed. So there you go. And then this is one of the most beloved weeds in the world, and one of the most honored medicinal plants in the world. So if you were to travel in any temperate place in the world, and you were to ask herbalists and even naturopathic doctors, what they would consider 10 of the best herbs are for medicinal purposes, this would be listed. And we're one of actually I think the only country in the world that has waged a war against dandelion. It's insane. Talking about the insanity of a culture. Ortho uses dandelion as their cover girl. They always have a little picture of this really bright yellow flower, and it's ridiculous because actually you can spray dandelion with ortho. That's bad, but you can. But it will come back. Sometimes not the second season, but it will come back. And I always say sometimes it comes back a little lopsided or three-headed, but dandelion will prevail. And it makes everybody's lawn so much more beautiful, right? I mean, like, why do you want to get rid of a golden yellow flower that is free medicine, free food? So how many of you have Italian heritage, right? Yeah, so this is common. Like if you go to a really good restaurant in Italy and you ask for a good Italian salad, you're going to get dandelion in it. Not full dandelion, nobody's going to eat that, it's so bitter. But there'll be the bitter greens, because bitter greens stimulate digestion, right? They stimulate the liver and stimulate digestion. You need bitters in order to digest well. Bitters are really important, which is why traditionally people would always take a little bitter tonic with their meals. I make what I call Bobby's bitters. My husband, Bobby's bitters, and I make it by the half gallon, right? So it doesn't cost me a lot of money. If you go to buy these things, it's expensive. But I make a half gallon of it and I just keep it there, and then we take little tonic glasses when we eat. And that was traditional. People just did that all around the world. So the greens are very bitter, and they're a good digestive aid, and they're very, very high. But one of our highest sources of vitamin A, by the way, which is essential for the immune health. Right? It's essential for immune health. And so you get these tremendous amounts of vitamin A and many, many other nutrients. And then medicinally, the root is a bitter, and it's used for stimulating liver and digestion. In fact, it's one of our top 10 herbs for liver and digestion. It has no counter side effects. There's no recorded adverse reactions to using it. And then the leaf is a primary herb as a diuretic. I would call it a mild but effective diuretic. So before, especially, I want to say this, before an older person is put on diuretic pills, you should try dandelion. Leaf, tablet, capsule, tincture, whatever way they'll take it, because they may not have to take diuretics. And diuretics are one of the most widely prescribed drugs for older people, right? Like women start to get, you see it a lot in women, it's the same in men, where they start to get swollen ankles. The heart's just not pumping quite the way it used to. Nothing quite works the way it used to, right? Heart's not pumping quite, and you get a lot of water in your ankles, and then your fingers swell up and your rings are really tight. I don't know if that happens to you, but I'm sure older women it does. And you go to your doctor and they're very kind and they're trying to help you, and they give you diuretics. So it's just common, without even the warnings that go with diuretics. The real issue here is your heart, not your urinary system. You're having water retention because your heart is not pumping. And so you give diuretics, you're not dealing with the issue. And just within, I've seen this happen, which is why I can say this. So within like a few months, sometimes within 6, 7, 8 months, person goes back to their doctor and now they're put on heart medication. So because that's what happens when you don't deal with the problem, right? So I really, really advocate people try dandelion or a good urinary tonic before going on heart medication, because it works. I told this story yesterday when I ran my herb store, which I ran for 18 years in Sonoma County. So I got to see a lot of what worked and didn't work on people, right? And I would have this group of wealthy women who lived in San Francisco, and they'd come down and spend their summer holidays on the Russian River. And they would, every year, they would come into my store and they say, "Oh, I forgot my diuretic pills. Would you make up that nice tea that you made up for me?" And every year I'd make that tea up, and they'd come in every month and get the tea, and they would say, "Oh, this works so much more better than my diuretics." And I'd say, "Yeah," but then they'd go back and use the diuretics when they got back home. It was just so funny. But so because what you have here is a plant that's working on your urinary system, yes, but it's supporting the whole body. So plants are not single, they're not like chemical constituents, just single constituents that are doing one or another thing in the body. They're really working on your whole body. Dandelion is just a tonic for people. It's a great herb to use. It's free, it's growing everywhere. It's almost begging us to use it, right? So yeah, great herb.
So if you're going to collect that to save for your year, because obviously it doesn't grow in the winter, what do you recommend us to do to
preserve it?
Dry it and put it in jars, or?
Yeah. So the question is like, how do you preserve it to use through the year, right? And so when you read your herb books, they always say, make sure you pick the plant before it flowers, which with dandelion's ridiculous, you know. You'd pick it like for 2 weeks and then the whole rest of the year it flowers. So yeah, no, what you do is you use the same discretion that you use when you go into a grocery store. Does the plant look healthy and vital? So a lot of times when plants go into flower, all the vitality is in the flower and there's very little in the leaf. But dandelion, even when it's in flower, oftentimes the leaves are beautiful. They're bitter, but they're still really good. So you can collect it, you can dry it, and then you have it for making tea. You can dig the roots. It's really pretty easy to dig roots, especially in your garden. You go in your garden, you're gonna have dandelion there every year, right? You dig up those roots, you're weeding your garden, you're also saving your roots, and you just come in and you dry them. And then, so you can store them dried. You can also make tinctures with them. You can powder them and you can put them in capsules, or you can powder them. You can add them to vinegar and make like vinegar tonics that then you eat the plant and then you also drink the vinegar, use it in your salad dressings. So preparation, and I don't really like to advocate for my books and stuff, but I do recommend, this is a really good book for beginners because it's full of recipes that absolutely work, and it walks you through the harvesting and the drying, and you know, just it was written for people who are, how do I dry these plants, and are these plants safe to use, and how do I give them to my family, and you know, so it's like kind of a step-by-step through herbalism for you. I also, for those of you who are more serious about learning herbs, I offer a home study course. I've offered it since 1981, actually. So it's been around for a long time. It still has a printed version, so you can order a printed version. We call it the classic printed version, and then there's an online version that has all the modern things like videos and all that kind of stuff that you get with online things. But I always keep the printed version because if I was taking it, I'd want the printed version. I wouldn't want to work online. So, and you can buy both, you know. So, anyway, okay. And so, so that's the beautiful flower. And the flowers, for those of you who like to, so flowers are edible when they're just starting to open up. When they're still like buds just opening, they're really nice in stir fries. They're munchy and crunchy, and they're not bitter. So you can stir fry them. And then you can also use the flowers when they're older like this, just taking the petals and adding them to salads, makes a nice addition. And also dandelion wine is really nice. If you like to make wine, you can make a nice dandelion. And then look at this. This is a giant dandelion I saw growing high in the Andes. I think I was at like something like 14 or 15,000 feet. This is like a dandelion on steroids. It was longer than my arm. I'm not kidding you. It's just huge dandelion. Oh, my that's my little sister telling me what to do again. And then I love this picture. This picture may not mean a lot to you, but this is Dr. Who. She was a renowned doctor and a professor at Harvard University. And when she retired from Harvard, she became the curator of the Arnold Arboretum, which is one of our finest arboretums on the East Coast. And every other year, for many years, I hosted a large international gathering called the International Herb Symposium. Brought about 800, 900 people from around the world to share herbal information. So it's still going on. I'm just not organizing anymore. I organized it for about 25 years. And I would also always invite all the teachers. So we had a staff of about 40 or 50 teachers that really came worldwide. That represented clinical herbalists and folkloric herbalists and shamanic herbalists, you know, from all different traditions to share. And so I would have a kind of a day with them ahead of time. And one year I took them to the Arnold Arboretum, and Dr. Who was invited to give us a tour. It was very honorary for us that this woman would do that. And so we toured the whole Arboretum, and when we were finished, so this is at the end, she's sitting on a beautiful branch of an oak tree. And all these herbalists from around the world, the teachers of the symposium, are standing in front of her asking her questions. And one woman says, my good friend Cascade said, Dr. Who, of all the plants in the garden that you showed us today, which is your favorite? And without missing a beat, she just said, dandelion, of course. I don't know if you get that, but you know, like we were seeing exotic plants from everywhere, and here's this professor and this, you know, long-term practitioner of Chinese herbal medicine, and there's no better herb in the world than dandelion. I just like, it was a moment. And then of course, can you see that? Yeah, there it is. So then of course we have St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum, and you have a lot of it growing here. And so in the Pacific Northwest, you have tons of it. And in fact, it is a problem here because in range areas where cattle and horses and sheep and goats are on pasture land with it, in drought years when there's not a lot of pasture, they don't normally eat it, but they will eat it. And when they eat a lot of this plant, or even small amounts, they can develop these large cancer-like cells on their body. It's like photosensitivity. So people have said that you'll hear sometimes that can be a problem with people as well. So I do want to assure you, it's very rare that people have photosensitivity from using St. John's wort. The times I've seen it, which have been in my career as a practicing herbalist, it's been over 50 years now, since I started my practice in 1972. I've seen 2 cases of that happen with a person, and it wasn't like they got large cancer cells. They got a rash, and they were using a standardized extract of St. John's wort for depression. Standardized extract was not whole plant. It was the hypericin, so a single plant constituent drawn out of the plant and then made into a tincture. It really makes it more like a drug than an herbal remedy. Are you following what I'm saying? Yeah, so we have very few, if any, cases of people getting sensitivity from using St. John's wort in the whole plant form. If you do get a rash, then you discontinue it. It's not serious, but it definitely is serious for animals. So before I tell you the rest of this story, so this plant has a long tradition of being used for damage done to nerve endings. So that's really how it traditionally was used. So like if you have neuralgia, or you have burns, like you have really bad burns and you don't have nerve impulse anymore, it helps to rejuvenate damaged nerve endings. More recently, so for maybe the last 30 or 40 years, it has been used for depression. In fact, it's been about 30 years ago, 60 Minutes did a study on St. John's wort. Do you remember, any of you remember that? So the young girl they interviewed on that show was one of my student, Maria, her daughter. That was the young woman. And she was using St. John's wort. She was a teenager. She was using St. John's wort for her mild depression, and she had really good results using it. So then 60 Minutes took that, and it went all over the nation, and then people started using St. John's wort in place of their medication, right? They would go off their Zoloft and it doesn't, again, we're talking herbal medicine is not superimposed over allopathic medicine. They really work differently. And it doesn't work for serious depression. It works for mild depression. And if you use it for serious depression, like when I'm talking about serious depression, I'm talking about life-threatening depression, where people are not wanting to get out of bed and not eating it's not going to work. People are going to have problems with it. So a really valuable plant was misrepresented and then caused problems in people. So I just want to help to clarify that. It is good for mild depression. The kind of depression you have a long winter and not a lot of sun, you're getting tired of your partner, they're boring you, you're getting, it's really good for that. Think of the signature of the plant, this bright yellow flower. It sort of brings that brightness. It does work really well for mild depression. So does counseling. So does eating well. So does getting out and doing exercise and engaging in life. So St. John's wort can be used in that way. Yes.
He had a really nasty bone spur on his elbow, and we used homeopathic hypericum.
Yeah.
And it cured it.
Yes, absolutely.
With nothing else.
Yeah, it's really great for any kind of, so it's also called trauma oil, so any kind of skin problems, it's so good for that. And you see it in all kinds of preparations, and it can be so helpful. So it's a wonderful plant. But anyway, I also wanted to share that what the Department of Agriculture did because of this problem that we were having on the West Coast with all the St. John's wort, so they introduced a beetle. And the beetle started eating a lot. They introduced it on the West Coast. It took about 30 years for it to travel across the United States. And about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we actually saw that beetle in New England. And it devours this plant, right? And we don't know what it eats, all the St. John's wort. I'm not sure what it's going to start eating on. Anyway, I don't think that's such a good idea, right, to do that. We just see that over and over again, that nature has a way of regulating itself, and it's done a marvelous job over the last thousands of years, and we've really been messing things up. But anyway, there is I think it's called, I forget what that beetle's called. Do any of you know? Is it the Klamath beetle? It's a little kind of a green beetle, and when you press it, it bleeds out this kind of red oil because of the St. John's wort. So how many of you have made St. John's wort? St. John's wort oil. I really, really want to say this summer, when the St. John's wort, I think I have a picture of it here for you. That's not a really good picture. Well, that's the oil being made. So when the bud is just opening, not when the flower is fully open, when the bud is just beginning to open, you go out and you press the buds with your finger, and when you get a big burst of red or scarlet, it looks like blood on your fingers, then you collect that St. John's wort flower. And you can collect a few leaves too, but mostly it's the flower, and you put it in a jar, a small jar. You don't need to make a lot of it, like a pint jar, and you cover it with olive oil and set it out. You put your lid on it and set it out in the sunshine. You'll get a beautiful blood red oil, bright yellow flower, blood red oil. It's kind of magical. And that oil, then you strain the herb off, and that oil is St. John's wort oil. It's quite expensive to buy, but very inexpensive to make. We always use olive oil because olive oil has a long shelf life. People always say, won't the oil go rancid when it's sitting out in the sun? So for some reason, when you're infusing your herbs and oil in the sun, they won't go rancid. Once you strain it off, if you let it sit out there, it will go rancid. Well, so it really depends on the strength of your St. John's wort, but I would say within a week or two, you have that beautiful oil. It starts changing almost overnight, but yeah. So and then this is a gallon jug of the St. John's wort oil. That's what it looks like when it's brewed up. It's beautiful, thick, gorgeous. And then, honey, are you keeping track of my time? Okay. So, yeah. So this is Mullen. This is another common weed. It's one of my favorites. I love this plant. Mullen grows in the harshest of soil. It grows along, it grows out of lava flows. When nothing else grows, you'll see this beautiful mullens coming up. It grows along train tracks where it's just all rocks and no soil at all. And then it will love growing in your garden. And it's just a handsome plant. You know, if it grows in your garden, I'd let it grow, you know. I mean, the only problem is it produces millions of seeds. So you'll have a million million mullen, not the next year, but 2 years later, you'll have a big crop. So that's the only problem. But yes.
Downy woodpeckers love the seeds.
Yeah, yeah. It's nice to leave your mullen stalks through the winter because the birds, first of all, I call them insect condominiums. Millions of little insects move in, and then all the birds come. So it's really a nice feeder for the birds in the wintertime. Yes, honey.
It's great if you put it into your hen houses for the wintertime.
The hen houses?
Yeah.
And for them to sleep on?
To pick the seeds out.
Oh, to pick the seeds.
In the wintertime.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a really, thank you so much for that. Yeah. You're also smart.
Sorry, going back to the St. John's wort, the beetle that
Oh,
you're talking about, or at least the one I found, the scientific name is Agrimus hyperici or hyperici, also commonly known as the St. John's wort root borer.
Okay, thank you so much for doing that. St. John's wort root borer. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
And it is a green jewel beetle.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it is really, it's actually very beautiful, but it's very destructive. So mullen is the root, the leaf, and the stalks, and the flowers are all used. So it's a major herb for bronchial congestion. And I would say that when it's like a mild cold, you know, like the everyday kind of common cold, if you get a really deep-seated bronchial infection where there's like deep green mucus and fluid in the lungs, I reach for stronger herbs. I would use elecampane, which also grows wild, and pleursy root that doesn't grow wild but is a gorgeous plant to grow in your gardens. Those are the ones that anytime anybody has serious bronchial infections, this mullen? Oh, elecampane and pleursy root. Pleursy root is Asclepias tuberosa. Yeah. And elecampane is part of the botanical name. So, yeah. So, but for all of the common colds, this is the, Mullen, Comfrey, coltsfoot, that's an old formula that was used. And it's what Mullen chemically has in it is mucilage, so it's soothing to the inflammation, and then it also has antibacterial, antiviral properties. It's a major herb. The leaf is a major herb for the lymphatic system, which is a major part of our immune system. And then the flowers of the stalk, when they're just opening up, are one of the best remedies for ear infections that are due to congestion in the body, not due to water in the ear. I really have to make that distinction, because if you have swimmer's ear or you get a lot of water in your ear and you get an infection from water, you do not want to put oil in your ear. It will make it worse. If you have a congestion, like if you have a bad cold, your baby has a bad cold, a lot of snot and bronchial stuff, and they have an ear infection, mullein flower oil warmed up to room temperature or warmed up to mother's milk, a little warm, put in your ears, is soothing, and it's major disinfectant. So it soothes the ear infection. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, but especially when I was younger, and I had a lot of friends who had babies, they'd bring their babies to me, and their babies would have these really bad ear infections, and they would be crying at night in such pain and agony. And all I'd have them do is put 2 drops or 3 drops down their ears, and the baby would almost instantly, like a minute, would stop crying. And then if you do that, you know, every hour, every couple hours, then the infection goes away. So it's just an amazing remedy. Have any of you ever used that mullein flower oil? Yeah. It worked great. Yeah, there you are. Yeah, it's pretty.
I actually have a question about that then. My grandson was born with a pretty large cleft palate, so he has
chronics.
You know, all those issues in his sinuses and ears and stuff. Would that be good for
Yeah,
him?
it'd be really good for him. Yeah, yeah. I know people have had treated their children who had chronic issues. And whenever you're unsure about the, so with major issues, which I would say that's major, you know, like, then, and you're not sure, if you work with a good natural healer or a naturopathic doctor or a medical doctor, but if you're working with a medical doctor, you have to make sure that they know about herbs, because they're not trained in it. And if you ask them, they're being responsible with what they know. They just would say, well, you shouldn't use it, because they don't know about it. It'd be like asking me about pharmaceuticals. I can't really tell you a lot about pharmaceuticals other than I don't like to use them and I don't trust them. And if I'm going to use them, I'm going to do a lot of research before I do. That would be my answer, because I'm not trained in it. So, you know, so when you read herb books, they always say, don't use plants unless you check with your doctor. And I'd say, that doesn't make any sense at all. You know, at all. Yeah, unless your doctor's trained, unless you're working with a naturopathic doctor or somebody who is very interested in holistic healing. And there are medical doctors like that for certain. Yeah, yeah. So another very common herb, beautiful. And I also like to say, for those of you who are backpackers and foragers, it makes really nice, soft, downy, compostable toilet paper when you're out in the woods. But those really fine hairs can be irritating to some people. So be mindful. Yeah. Let's just look really quickly. I won't talk a lot about it. Chamomile is another incredible plant. Now here in the Pacific Northwest, you have a plant that looks like chamomile. It's called dogweed. It's extreme. It grows profusely in fields and meadows. It looks just like chamomile. It's very, very bitter, and it's mildly toxic. You do not want to substitute it for chamomile. In the Pacific Northwest, you don't have chamomile that grows wild. It's going to be growing cultivated. You do not have wild stands. So if you think you have wild chamomile, it'd be highly unusual, but you do have dogweed. So just wanted to point that out. And then this is borage. I love this plant. Pardon?
I love it.
I know. Do you love borage?
It's all in my garden.
Yeah.
I love it in some places.
Yeah. It's very beautiful. It's a wonderful plant. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. I'm just going to show you a little bit more. This plant, this next one, you have to have growing. You have to plant Echinacea. It's your duty and your job to plant Echinacea. Our wild stands have been depleted. So Echinacea is native to the North American continent. It was found growing nowhere else in the world, but it is now because people cultivate it everywhere. When people in the United States were not using plants, like through the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, this plant was being shipped in massive tonnage amounts. We're talking thousands and thousands of tons to European countries because they were using it in the pharmaceutical industry, in their herbal industry. They were making amazing immune tonics out of it, why we were not using this plant. It's just ridiculous. It's one of the great contributions from the North American continent to world herbalism. This plant is a major herb for surface immunity. So like when you have really deep chronic immune issues, this is not necessarily the plant that you would use. There are other herbs. But when you're trying to fight off colds and flus and infections, like what I would say, you know, all the common bacteria are running around, this plant's very effective. And if it's not working for you, I generally say it's usually dosage, because if you look at a bottle and it says, you know, use 40 drops, first of all, I don't know who counts those drops out. I always like to say you've got a Virgo, you know, Virgo in your chart, then you're going to love counting 40 drops. But my husband's a Virgo, he would count those 40 drops. But, you know, that 40 drops is not going to do anything. You know, you have to infuse your system with this plant. So I usually, you know, will take like a dropper full or two or a shot glass through like every hour until whatever is coming at me is gone. And, you know, and that's the way I treat people with it. Now, if you are a highly sensitive person who have major reactions to everything you eat, you wouldn't use plants in this way. You would use them more mildly, just to let you know that. But for most of us, if you want Echinacea to work, you have to take it in sufficient dosages. So to buy a little 1 ounce bottle of it, which is about $12 or $15, and I totally understand why, because if you're growing this plant, 3 to 4 years to grow it, then you're digging it, you're cleaning it, you're scraping it, you're chopping it, now you're making medicine with it, you pour it off, you pour it into a bottle, you label it. $15 doesn't even cover your time. So I never mind when I'm buying plants that I know are good quality. But for your family, you want to grow it or you want to buy it from a good grower, and you make yourself a quart or even a half a gallon if you want to share it. Once you make that tincture, it will last you for years. You know, it's by years, I mean it won't go bad. It's preserved, right? So I really recommend that people grow this. And you want to grow like, first of all, it's beautiful. If you're just growing it ornamentally, it's great. So you grow like 8 or 9 plants, and then in 3 years you dig up 3 or 4 of those roots, or even 1 root, and you make yourself a nice tincture. And I recommend making whole plant tincture. Have any of you made whole plant Echinacea tincture? So I'm going to take a moment just to describe how to do this, and then we're going to go into the... So you get a quart jar, really literally get a half a gallon jar. And let's say you have your nice Echinaceas. They're 3 to 4 years old. They need to be at least 3 years old. And you don't want them much older than 5 or 6 years because they get tough. So somewhere in that range. And in the early spring, when the plants are coming up and the leaves are really beautiful and potent and strong, you collect a nice handful of leaves. You can chop them up a little bit if you want so they're more exposed. And you put them in your I would say half-gallon jar or your quart jar. And then you cover them, and I'm going to say with alcohol, because alcohol will make a stronger tincture. So alcohol here, I'm talking really like an 80 proof, at most 100 proof. So that would be like gin, vodka, brandy, not pure evergreen. Don't do that. Buy like a 80 proof or 100 proof. Now, if you don't like using alcohol, and there's lots of reasons not to use it, religious reasons, because you have addictions in the family, then you can use vinegar, but it will not be as strong. So you just, it's like more like a tonic for you, but it's a good alternative if you don't want to use alcohol. But I like to assure you, when you take that half teaspoon or a teaspoon of alcoholic tincture, you're getting about a 1/4 teaspoon of alcohol in that, because the rest of it, by the nature of alcohol, is water. Do you know that when you buy an 80 proof alcohol, half the proof is the percentage of alcohol in the bottle? So it's 40% alcohol, 60% water. So I just like you to know that it's not like you're getting a teaspoon of alcohol, it's about a 1/4 of a teaspoon of alcohol. So you've covered up that leaf with just enough vinegar, enough solvent, we call that, enough liquid to cover it by about 1 inch. So if I have this much leaf, I'm putting 1 inch of alcohol over that. If I say alcohol, just interpret it to mean whatever liquid you want, okay? And now the plants have gone on another few weeks, and now they're in beautiful blossom. So I go out now and I pick the blossoms. The blossoms have different, so the leaf and the blossoms have different properties than the root. They have similar, but the leaf actually has more antimicrobial property than the root, and so do the flowers. Very, very medicinal. So I put them in there, and now I have these flowers in here, and I'm going to cover them again by about just an inch of alcohol. And I just put it on my counter. And now it's late in the summer, and the seed pods are forming, the hard seed pods. And I pick those because those also have antimicrobial, antibacterial properties in them, and antiviral property. And I put those in there, and now I've come up to this high, and I cover them with alcohol. Always about an inch over everything. And now it's fall, mid-fall, the plant's dying back, the energy's going into the root. So I'm picking each plant when it's at its prime, has the medicine part. Now the root energy's gone back to the root. I'm going to dig my root, clean it, takes a long time, scrub it, clean it, chop it up really fine, and now I'm going to put it in my jar, and I'm going to cover the whole thing by another inch or two of alcohol, just enough to cover it. I'm going to let the whole thing sit now for 3 to 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, enough to draw out all the properties of that root. And then I strain that. It's called whole plant Echinacea tincture. It's unbelievably good, much better than just the root. And it's so simple to make. Nice if you have children. You know, it's really a fun project to do with family members. So another thing that you can do this year. All right, so we looked at a few herbs. The list could go on and on and on. I have so many plants that I could just talk about forever. Roses and, oh, look at that. Aren't they beautiful? Oh, my.
Are wild roses?
Oh, absolutely. You bet.
I mean, because mine are all flowering.
Look at that.
Petals,
Oh,
they're beautiful.
there I am in Vermont, gazing out over the world. Okay. Anyway, well, here we'll leave with this is a picture of my grandmother, actually. Yeah, we'll leave Grandma up there. She was quite elderly there. I love this picture. She's looking at a zucchini. And she's loving that zucchini. I don't want to know what she's really thinking, but she's... Yeah, that's so good, Betty. That's the difference between my sister and I. I love you so much. Betty says she's thinking of making dolma, you know, it's like stuffed zucchini. Yeah. And my mind just did a little twist. I'm going to bring it back. She's thinking of making dolma. Thank you, Betty. Okay, we're going to change that picture. Here's my mother. That's our beloved mom on her farm. Yeah. So we have a few minutes. Oh yeah. So Betty is
If you have not signed this for Rosemary's recipe and handouts, I'm going to just leave it sitting on this chair up here, and you can afterwards come and sign it. If you did it yesterday, don't do a repeat on it. But if you have not, it's here. Okay?
Yeah, and I really want to assure you this. I'm not going to put you on any mailing list. This is going to go to Janelle, and then. Yeah, and then Janelle will send you the handouts, and it's going to be about a week, so not to worry, because I'm going to go to our family reunion, and then when I get home, I'll send you. I have the Herbs for Family Health handout already, but Betty was saying it'd be really good. I have a whole handout of it's called Rosemary's Favorite Recipes. So.
Well, it has to be because I wrote recipes on the clipboard there,
okay, so. Thanks.
Can I move this?
Yeah, honey, you can. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to show you how to demonstrate how to make a few. Yeah, you can shut it down. So just to demonstrate the very many ways that you have to use herbs in family health. So the thing about, there are certain strengths, like tinctures are concentrated extracts. If they're made in alcohol, they're usually really potent because alcohol and the water in the alcohol extract most of the chemical constituents of plants. And water is also, like making herbal teas, that's a really common way. Herbal teas are also really good because water, which is our most user-friendly solvent, right, extracts most of the chemical constituents and minerals and vitamins from plants. The downfall of water is that there's no preservative property, so you have to make teas like every other day, every couple days, or every day. And for some people, especially long-term health issues, that you don't get the compliance that you do when you're using tinctures. And also another delivery system, of course, are thank you, Betty, are capsules and pills, which we've been trained to, modern medicine, that's the major way, right? And so you find a lot of compliancy in pills and capsules. But it's one of my least favorite ways. It's very convenient, swallow down the medicine, but you have to have really good digestive system for those to really be distributed well. It has to go through your liver and digestion and then through your bloodstream for those little capsules to work. And because herbs are not like drugs where they're just single constituents in there, there's a whole compounds of plants, it's not going to be as potent. So they're good, they're convenient, but I don't find them to work as strong as a tincture or a tea. There's also oxymills, which are mixtures of vinegar and honey and herbs. And so it's syrups. Many of you are making elderberry syrup. How many of you make the elderberry syrup? So there's lots of ways that we can use herbs. One of my favorite, of course, is the tinctures, and because they're so easy to make. So I'm going to make a vinegar tincture for you, and it's one of my most famous recipes. It's called fire cider. I don't know if many of you have made it. I developed this recipe, and there are many variations on this recipe, but the first time that we know that it was made and it was called fire cider was in 1979 at the California School of Herbal Studies. And I was making tinctures. It was a class in tinctures, and I wanted to make something that my students could make that didn't require an herb store, that you could go to a grocery store or your garden. So something that people who weren't studying to be herbalists could make. It could be used as a tonic, and also it could be used as a medicine. So this is both tonifying, meaning that you can use it to keep healthy, but if you had a cold or a flu illness, you could also use it as a medicine. All of these herbs that we're going to put in here are common to you, and you actually use them in cooking. So what makes the difference between a culinary herb and a medicinal herb is simply frequency of dosage and strength of dosage. So every single herb in your culinary cooking closet is a medicinal plant that was actually found its way into cooking, not because of the flavor, because some of them are really bitter and awful tasting, but we become familiar with the flavors. It was because they aided in the digestion, or they helped with the bacteria. So like if you love, say, East Indian food, and they use all those hot, spicy, warming foods, those circulatory herbs, it's because they all have antibacterial properties in those hot, moist areas. You have so much bacteria. If you leave your food out, it's going to go get rotten pretty quickly. But over centuries, we like the taste of turmeric and ginger and curries and stuff, right? The same with basil and tomatoes. Basil does taste good, but we associate basil with tomatoes, right? I mean, who would make a tomato sauce without basil in it? And it's because basil aids in the digestion of acid in tomatoes. So every culinary herb that you study is there because of originally it was because it helped with the food preparation. So I really like you to know, oh, sorry, grandmother's apron. My sister says I can't have it, but I can wear it. Because she knows I covet her apron. I know we're not supposed to covet things, but I do covet this apron. I have a real thing for aprons, and I don't know how my sister got this apron before I saw it.
I know. I was at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. So anyway, so these herbs that we're putting in here are horseradish. How many of you grow horseradish? So horseradish is my #1 favorite remedy for any kind of upper respiratory problem. It also serves as a good lower respiratory problem as well. But above any herb that I have, like the 300 herbs I might have in my apothecary, horseradish is the #1 that I'll go for whenever there's a serious upper respiratory problem. So you get those bad sinus headaches that feel like World War III is happening in your head. This herb will, even if you get a good fresh horseradish that you dig, and you just sit there and grate it by hand, don't use your Cuisinart or your just grate it by hand. By the time you're finished grating, your sinuses are going to be cleared. It's just, part of it. So horseradish is was a major part of this formula. I'm sorry, I'm going to use my hands, but I did use that nice clean sterilizer over there.
And the vinegar is going to take care of everything.
No, this is fresh because dried. Yeah, so how I got fresh horseradish root in the spring is in the fall. I get it, dig it up or buy it because if you can get it in farmers markets, etc. And then I don't clean it or anything. I wrap it up in saran wrap, which I don't love at all. I hate saran wrap. I think it's toxic and dangerous to us. I'm so sorry. I just want to warn you. Anyway, but I wrap it up in it because it will seal it in and it keeps it moist for me during the winter time. So it keeps it safe all during the winter, you know, fresh, and then I can grate it. Because when it's dry or when you buy it prepared, it loses its properties really quickly. So that's why and I use, you know, especially when I was in practice, I used horseradish a lot with those upper respiratory problems. So anyway, and so then, yeah, that'd be good. And then I use onion. Onion is an allium. It has mild antiseptic, antibacterial properties. Its kissing cousin is garlic, and we're going to put a lot of garlic in here as well. But I put the onion in because it also is a good supporter. And the recipe is, as you can see, it's kind of a homemade recipe. You just put whatever you have in. Ideally, if you've never made it before, you just put equal portions in. Or yeah, and then, so there's a whole book that came out called Fire Cider. This recipe is now world famous, and that's because we had to fight for it. I'll tell you that story in a minute. Let's first of all, so I'm going to put about equal proportions. That's one way you can do it, but this is how you work with plants. So we know that all these herbs are safe. We don't have to worry about counterindications with them, other than they're hot and spicy. So some of you, like my sister, does not like hot and spicy. It doesn't work for her. So then you would want to tame it down. You wouldn't want to put so much horseradish or garlic. But let's say that you get a lot of upper respiratory infections, you know, a lot of sinus infections, etc. Then you just use more horseradish. Or if you get more colds and flus, you'd use more garlic. So you can just change the formula.
It's the peppers that I don't like.
I know. And then we're going to put, then we just put garlic in, and we have 3 cloves, so 3 heads. We're going to put 3 heads of garlic in, because we're going to use what we have. And then also ginger is another part of the formula. So all these are warming, circulatory, respiratory herbs. They're all herbs that you can use as preventatives, and also when you're ill, you can use these herbs. Ginger has a long history of being used for digestive upsets, for cramps. It's really a wonderful medicinal plant. And again, the difference in the dosage is if you're using it to spice something, you use a sprinkle. If we're using it for medicine, I might use a teaspoon over a tablespoon in a cup, and I might use more frequent dosaging. I use a lot of my culinaries for medicinal purposes. Thyme is like an excellent herb for colds and flus. Use it as tea. You can make tincture with it. And then I just use it more. So I think we'll just use all this in here, actually. Thank you, Betty. And then we're going to put, so we have garlic, ginger, horseradish, onion, and then peppers. These are my hot cayenne peppers that I grew. And you know, if you have a little adverse reaction to cayenne or hot peppers, you don't even have to put them in there. But I put, again, like this formula was developed to be warming, circulatory, fiery, to move things through your body, move it through your respiratory, you know, when you're coughing, to get everything, what we call expectorant, move it this way, move it down through your colon. So if you have a lot of sluggishness in your digestion, it's going to move things through the body. So maybe we'll just add all the cayenne. That's a lot of cayenne.
So those who were here last year, our oldest sister Diane was with us, and she likes the spices. So this is where the straw is going.
This is where the straw is going.
Getting there next.
You don't even have, yeah, oh, you're just doing, yeah. So does somebody want to come up and help us peel up things so we get all this garlic in here? And then, yeah, if you don't mind, thank you, honey. If you would just get that peeled, that'd be good. So we'll put all this garlic in there, and then, so this is how you make a tincture. We're going to put enough apple cider. Maybe I'll just add the rest of those onions too. Might as well fill the jar up. Put all the ginger in there. Ginger also is really helpful for people who get motion sickness. I make these little ginger balls where I take ginger powder and I mix them with honey. And then it's so hot, right? Like if you ever just mix ginger powder with honey, it's very, very hot. So then I'll add a little cinnamon to it to sort of tame it down, or a little carob, or a little cocoa powder. It makes it taste really good. Excuse me.
Hey, it's the pepper. The peppers are getting.
It's a pepper. That is the pepper. And then I just roll these into what I call hot ginger balls, and roll them into pea-sized balls, not like the Zoom balls that we made. Pea-sized balls, and then dry them. And those are really, really good for motion sickness, and also just digestive problems. So you have these little hot ginger balls. If we have time, I'll make them for you because I brought the ingredients for doing it. That's good. Oh, we have a little helper here. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
If you have an extra jar, you could just shake it real hard.
Yeah.
And it would come apart. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, that's good.
almost done.
We're almost done. And we'll put some more horseradish in there. And then we're going to cover it with vinegar. And we're going to so basically this is how you make a tincture. And for those of you who are looking at the way I'm doing and go, this will never work, there are recipes. You can follow. I have all these recipes in this book. So while they're finishing that, and Betty, I'll let you put the vinegar on it. So we'll cover it with about, you always want to keep it covered with at least a couple inches of liquid. That's always important. So what happened with fire cider, and the reason it's become so famous is I started teaching my students to make it. It was just one of these common recipes, right? And so people would teach other people, and it kind of spread and went all around the country. Like I could be in New England and go to somebody's class and they would be making their version of fire cider, which is exactly how herbal recipes have always been shared. It was really fun, and people gave it different names. It was all called all kinds of things, but basically the formula is the same. And people were selling it on Etsy. It was several companies, and people would sell it at their farmers markets and at the local herb stores. Did any of you see it around for sale? Fire cider? Yeah. It was just a good recipe. It was effective. It was easy to make, you know, and everything was going along fine. And then a young company they were not herbalists. They'd never made herbal products, but they saw this recipe and they started making it. They started selling it. This was in Massachusetts. They started selling it at their local fairs, and people were buying it, and they were good salespeople and they sold a lot. And then they decided they were going to trademark the name. They were going to claim the name as their own, right? And so in the trademark industry, if you decide to trademark something, you have to let other people know. There's like a 8-month period where you have a chance to say, no, you can't do this because there's lots of other companies making this. You have to send out notices. But this company did not send their notices out until that notice time was over. So right when the 8 months or 6 months, whatever that period was over, they sent notices out to the companies to say, very nice notices, like, we're so sorry to tell you, but we've now own this name. It's ours. You can't use it. Well, the herbal community got kind of upset about that, right? It's like a lot of people have been making this for 30 or 40 years, older than the people, by the way, who trademarked the name.
They shouldn't even be able to.
Yeah. So we ended up, what ended up happening is 3 of the young women, who I always like to honor them, they decided to take a stand for fire cider. And they kind of spoke up against this company, and they were selling the product themselves. And this company sued these 3 herbalists $100,000, right? These girls had never seen $100,000 in their entire life. And they're herbalists, right, who make little products and sell them at farmers markets. So they had to fight that, otherwise they would have had to pay for it. So they fought it, and then they decided they fought it enough that they got the $100,000 dropped. The judge said, no, they don't have to pay that. But so they could have just dropped it, but they said, no, we're going to go all the way. And so I stood with them through this whole thing. We all went out. We went after the company, and it took us 5 years and 9 days in federal court, but we got the name back. Yeah, and why that is so awesome, the reason that we did it really was a huge investment of time. We didn't ask for any money from the company. We didn't countersue. We did nothing. And thankfully, we had the most incredible lawyers. So they didn't charge us a penny. It was all pro bono. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding you. It was like would have been over $1 million in lawyer fees. Yeah. But, and the reason I think the lawyers got really into it too is because they knew we were just fighting for a name, you know. But the reason we did it was because there are hundreds of products like this out there that some are hundreds of years old that people have been trading and selling, and some of them are new names that people, and if that fire cider had gotten trademarked, then that means all of these common names that are common properties could have been trademarked. It would have already happened. It did start to happen, like fire. We always use the example of 4 Thieves vinegar, which is an herbal product that's been traded and sold for 500 years, got trademarked during that period. So yeah, we did it.
Is this good?
And yeah, that's beautiful. Look at that.
So I have a question about the vinegar.
That's perfect. Yes.
Can I use homemade vinegar?
Yes, of course. Homemade vinegar. This is basically homemade vinegar put in a bottle in it's fermented, it's got a mother in it. If you let it sit, it will start to get that nice mother, that slimy mother in there. So that's the fireside. Isn't that beautiful? And I usually let it sit, so it's not quite done. So I let it sit 4 to 6 weeks, and then you strain it. And if you let it sit 4 to 6 weeks and you strain it, all these herbs are still good in it. So I want to tell you what to do with those. They still have a lot of flavor and a property. But I strain off the liquid. Now it's going to be hot and fiery and horseradishy. It is strong. And now I add honey to it. That's the really final thing. And the amount of honey you add is like everything else. You add to taste. So like if you don't like a lot of peppers, you just add no pepper. So with the amount of honey, it's the taste. So I usually recommend if you have a quart, add about a cup of honey. The more honey you add, the more you tame down those hot fire. You still have the properties of the hot fire, but now you have the mellowness of the honey added there. And honey is a medicine as well. It's very, very soothing to the mucous membranes. But the honey will give you that sweet, hot, fiery, gingery flavor. It's really nice. It's pungent, hot, fiery, and sweet. So it's really delicious. And people use it in their salad dressings. They put it on their grains. They put it on their vegetables. It's really, really a nice tonic medicine. And if you're prone to illness, like in the Pacific Northwest like this, a lot of colds and flus, just taking a little shot glass braces you. A little shot glass of it, in the afternoon. Water. Oh yeah, we need the water. So, and once it's strained, it's a vinegar tincture, so it'll last for months. The books will say 6 or 8 months. Honestly, it'll last for months and months and months. It may get a little mother in it because it's vinegar, but that's just telling you it's fermenting and alive. It's not a problem.
Do you have to shake it every day?
Yeah, so, like when tinctures are sitting up, I usually tell people, keep it in a warm place on your counter and give it a good shake. Just shake it every day. Or every couple days. And it won't happen with fire cider, but a lot of the times when you're making tinctures, especially if they're powders or finely ground, they'll settle to the bottom and they'll make like a sludge down there. So if you're not shaking it, the liquid isn't getting into it. So that's one reason. But really the other reason is, again, it just has to do with potentizing. It's taking your energy and, just mixing it up and saying your prayers. Or I always tell people this is when you can let all your wild spirit come out. Sing a little song to your medicine. Pray to God to make your medicine helpful for your community or your family. Bring energetics into it, and this is your opportunity to do that. So it's doing something physiologically. It's stirring up the plants. It's called agitation. This is one of those times when agitation's good. Do a little shaking. So, yeah. I look at this and I just like, ooh, I just love it. It's so good. Oh, and so then you have what we call the mark. So the mark is the word technically that's used for the leftover herb. And so sometimes you make this and you leave it sit there for months. You forget to strain it. The mark is going to be very, won't have a lot of potency in it. But if you strain it in 4 to 6 weeks, your liquid is going to be really strong, but you're also still going to have a lot of good flavor and strength in there. So I used to just toss it, and then one day I'm looking at this, and I'm just thinking, I'm not going to waste this stuff. So I put it in my blender, and I added a little more honey, and I just ground it up. And it made this amazing like chutney. It was like sweet, sour, pungent, bitter. It was and hot. Oh, it's so good in sandwiches and with your burgers, and it's just delicious. And then sometimes I add like raisins and dates to it, right? And then it's like sweet and salty and weird and wonderful and yum, yum, yum. So anyway, yeah, so you can make a nice chutney with the leftovers so long as you don't forget it and leave it sit too long. So then the other thing, Betty loves it when I make the spritzers. So it's another way that you can make, really use your herbs. You can make a nice herb tea, and then you can add essential oils to it. And you have to preserve it with something. So I use a little bit of gin because it doesn't have a smell. So you need a little bit of a preservative. You could use a rubbing alcohol, but I think this is better. You could use a witch hazel, but you need this is like a 1 ounce size. You need about at least a teaspoon of something that will preserve that water, because otherwise the water will go bad. And if you're using an herb tea in here, like let's say you want to make a calendula tea, then you're going to use at least a tablespoon of something like vodka or gin that doesn't have a smell, but that will serve as a preservative. And then these spritzers are really nice on those hot days. So you can just use them to spritz and clean. You can also put things like lavender and tea tree oil in them and use them for disinfecting. Really, it's a really nice disinfectant for, you know, rooms and for scents. So rather than having to buy those room scents, so many people buy these.
How about Mom? Mom was famous for the spray can.
Oh yeah, there's just these synthetic scents that are just horrible, you know. So these are like natural scents that are disinfectant. You can also just put things like lavender oil in and just spritz your face. Like I do a lot of traveling, and I used to do a lot when I was teaching. I travel all over the world, and I'd end up a lot of times staying in beautiful places, but oftentimes hotels. And so if you stay sometimes in hotels, you know, you walk into the room and you can just feel the energy. You don't know what's gone on in that room. It just doesn't feel clean to you or something. So I would always carry a little bottle of essential oil of lavender and then a bottle like this. And I would just add water, put the essential oil in there, and I just spritz that room. And it would just cleanse that room for me. So it's really a nice way of doing that. So it's so simple. You can buy these, but it's also like costs nothing to make them, you know. So we're going to make one, not with peppermint oil though. We'll use, no, because the peppermint oil, we could use peppermint oil.
It's the lavender.
Yeah, the lavender we'll put in there. We'll do that. But let's say, are any of you students and study a lot, or authors and write a lot and stuff, and you're at the computer a bunch and you get that brain fatigue, so you might take a little brain tonic. But then I always keep a little bottle of rosemary, just like this. I put a couple drops of rosemary essential oil in a bottle. I fill it up with water, put that little teaspoon of vodka in there, and then just spritz myself, and it just like gets my brain tingling. The air gets all fresh around me. It's just a really lovely way, and it's so simple, which is why I want to show you. So it's another way that you can do home herbalism, really simple. So we're going to add a little bit of vodka to this.
You can thank the hamburger vendor over there for the bottle of water. Go buy a hamburger from him.
Yeah, now if I was using tea with this, let's say I made a rosemary tea or a lavender tea, whoops, I don't want that much in there, then I would put at least a tablespoon, because the tea will tend to go bad quicker because it has herbs in it that would rot it more. And then I'm going to put the water in next, and then I add the essential oil. And there's no exact proportion of oil, because all the oil brands are different and all the oils have different strengths. So you add it according to the scent that you like. So you just add the water. And lavender, I'll add a lot, because lavender is inexpensive. It's sustainably harvested. I don't have to worry about, and I want it to smell really strong. These are really nice if you travel in the cars on hot days. And my grandmother used to keep like a little ice tub with rags in it, so we'd be driving and they would give us those ice things, you know, to put on. This is even better, actually. So you shake it so that way you can see, do you need to add more oil or not? And then you just,
There are some
oh, that's so nice.
oils, isn't there?
And if you have glasses, you have to take your glasses off.
If I turn my head.
Yeah.
But isn't there some that are, you have to be careful
Yes.
to have animals?
Yeah, like with catnip or something, or you do have to be, isn't that,
That smells really good.
I know.
That's probably enough.
So here's the thing with lavender that makes it so effective. So one is that it is not super expensive, because it's almost all coming from cultivated sources, and they grow huge fields of lavender, so sustainable. It's also a powerful nervine, so if you're really anxious, this is really helpful. You can take a little tincture of kava or St. John's wort and then spritz yourself. It's also a really good disinfectant, which is where the lavandula is the botanical name of lavender, and you can pass that around, honey. And the laundria in French, comes from lavender. It's a cleansing disinfectant herb, right? So you can also use it as a disinfectant. So it just and it's safe. Now, the one counterindication that you may read is that essential oil straight on young boys can cause, I forget the term of it, but can cause enlarged breasts. So what's it called again? Gyomestia. So I've done research on that because I saw that in some reports that came out. So there's I think there's is it tea tree as well too? Lavender and tea tree. So there's 3 cases that they said were a result of mothers using lavender oil on young boys, and it developed.
So it's just for young boys?
Just for young boys, yeah.
My husband's like super, he's like, I don't know.
No, it doesn't work. I mean, there's other reasons older men get enlarged breasts, but it's not. Sometimes it's overeating, sometimes there's hormonal changes, yeah. Anyway, but so the leading researchers of essential oils in the country, like, so if you look at the reports, they say there is no danger of it at all. And I have this new version, a new edition coming out on my children's health book, and I do put the studies in there so people know. But again, so I would always say this, if you're concerned, it's better not to, there's other plants you can use, right? If that's a concern for you, do not use lavender on your young boys. But I don't feel it's an issue, and when I looked at the studies, they're just so inconclusive. So isn't that nice? You can do that with rosemary oil, do that with chamomile oil. So one of the things that I do with my cats, because we have a little cat farm, is I take catnip oil, which can be very toxic when used straight, but I take the catnip essential oil, I do the very same thing. I add it to a little bottle of water, and then I put a little bit of alcohol to preserve it, and then I spritz their little scratch toys, and then they're so happy. They just go around scratching everything that they're supposed to, and roll around on their toys. And
it energizes them.
It's like it's just the opposite. So then,
okay, I want to tell you, it's 10 to 12.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes, and
no, it's actually supposed to be done, but
We have 10 minutes. Yes,
yeah, keep going. Okay. So, I mean, last year when I was here, I did my whole class on herbal preparation. We did everything, salves, etc. And this year I purposely didn't, because it's so much schlepping. And then the night before I'm getting ready to pack up and come on this trip, and I'm calling my sister, and she was saying, well, what about all the stuff we're supposed to get together? I said, no, I'm just going to talk this time. She was so disappointed. Yes. So I spent that night gathering up all the herbs. So one of the things we were going to make, and we did this yesterday, so you're welcome to leave early unless you want another Zoom ball. Yes. But this is another formula that I'm going to show you how to make a delivery system for herbal remedies. So we're going to make what I call adaptogenic Zoom balls. They're kind of energizing balls for you. But you can use this same basic recipe to make like any kind of formula for a chronic long-term situation. It will not work for short-term. Like if you have a cold coming on, you're not necessarily going to put your Echinacea in this ball, because you need something that's going to work quickly and go into your bloodstream. This is like if you have, maybe a long-term cardiovascular health and you want a tonic, you could put like linden flower and motherwort powdered in this formula, and then have these nice candy balls that you take once a day, and they could be filled with nourishing things so that it's not like eating sugar candy, it's eating something really healthy for you, delivering these particular medicines that are good for you. It's really good for children. Like you have a child who has long-term immune issues where they're always getting sick, or a child who has long-term respiratory problems. So they can be applied in a lot of ways. So it's just making something taste really good. And because I found in my work with plants that anybody who's into herbalism will take anything bitter proudly. But for older people and children, you have to make the medicine taste good. Like, what do they say? Spoonful of honey makes the medicine go down. So the particular recipe I'm going to show you today, and it's going to be in your handout, and you're going to get right proportions. So don't let the crazy way I'm making this confuse you. You will get, I will say exactly how much to put of everything. So we're going to use a group of herbs that are called adaptogens. And those adaptogens, also another slash, I call them adaptogens tonics. They're herbs that are meant to be used long-term because they rejuvenate and regenerate the body. And they're oftentimes classified as herbs for longevity. And were used by older people in cultures whose systems are just getting a little tired. So these herbs have a long history of being used to rejuvenate the system. And the reason I put these in here because I'm also using herbs that are very stimulating. And I don't want us to take these stimulating herbs and then have that after coffee feeling, you know, like where you just, hey, you have your coffee, you get stimulated, and then you get really worn out and tired. We want something that's going to kind of lift us up. So along with the adaptogenic herbs, I'm using 2 herbs that are really stimulants. They're not everyday herbs. They're just like coffee. I don't really recommend really strong herbs for people every day. I put them down here, classify them as really strong medicine that you use when you need it. So we use, I know most people in our culture use caffeine stimulating herbs every day because they're kind of tired and worn out, and caffeine rich herbs really overstimulate us. They don't provide foundational energy, they overwork our adrenals, right? So people end up oftentimes getting adrenal exhaustion when we don't rest. Now that doesn't mean you can't drink coffee every day, so long as you're supporting your whole system. But oftentimes what we see is in middle age when people should just be getting their steam, right? You worked out all your issues, you've got your relationship solid now, your kids are like reached maturity and they're on their way, so you should just be getting your steam, right? We're like in middle age. It's like a really, but you oftentimes see people exhausted. That's really when we see a lot of adrenal exhaustion. And I think it's overuse of stimulants without creating foundational wellness, without restoring the vitality of the body. So I'm using 2 very caffeine-rich herbs, an herb called guarana and cola. But unlike the everyday caffeine herbs that we use, like coffee, they don't have any other alkaloids in it. But coffee has over 13 different alkaloids, so it's very physiologically addictive and physiologically strong in the body. So just something to consider, you know. It's one thing if you wake up every day and you feel really good and you have your coffee, but it's something to reevaluate if you wake up and you're really, really exhausted in the morning and you can't say hello to anybody and you stumble to the coffee maker and you make something caffeine rich, which is a really strong herb, and you have to drink that to get going. At some point, your system's going to wear out, right?
You want all that or not?
No. So I don't think we're going to need it all actually, but most of it. But we'll start with the nut butter. So in this formula, in this recipe, what we're doing is we're going to make a yummy candy. We're going to start with nut butters. So you have a choice of lots of nut butters. If you're wealthy, you can use hazelnut butter, and even now almond butter is quite expensive. I think we are using almond.
We're not rich, but we're using almond butter.
Yeah, it's just these nut butters have gone expensive. And if you don't have a lot of money, you can use peanut butter. You know, it's a good alternative. I used to be a snob about nut butters and just use cashew and almond, but you know, I realized that for a lot of people, peanut butter is a basic good butter. So you can use peanut butter as well. But we're using almond butter, and a lot of times I'll use cashew, and I always use sesame seed butter, like a tahini or sesame. For one thing, it's not a nut butter, it's a seed butter, really high in calcium, really nourishing, and much easier to digest than nut butter. So that's why, and also we're Armenians, so Armenians always use tahini. So you have choices of your nut butters is what I'm trying to say. And then we use honey as the base. You can use maple syrup, you can use rice syrup. This is a nice local honey that Betty's contributing.
If you go to the hamburger place, they're the ones who, it's their honey, the shea, Dalrymples.
So,
all this or
we'll put all of that in there. We might as well make a lot now. And then, but as I said, don't worry how we're doing this. I've made these balls so often that I could do it in my sleep, but you will have a recipe. The idea is to make your base. So this is our base, nut butter and honey, nut butter and sweetener. You want to make it sweeter than your finished product, because when you see the amount of herbs, so this isn't really about the nut butter and honey. This is the base for the delivery of the herbs. So I want to make sure that you each get at least a half a teaspoon, maybe even a teaspoon of herb in this formula, right? So, but my proportion is usually about, for 1 cup of nut butter, so 1 part of nut butter, it's usually about a half a part of honey, sometimes a little more. So I want my nut butter base to taste sweeter than the finished product, because I'm going to add a ton of really bitter, not good tasting herbs, and I'm using this to camouflage it, right? It's a really brilliant recipe. So, and then we'll add the honey and we'll stir that up. And then I'll start adding, the second part of the formula is the herb. And I'm going to, as I said, use adaptogens.
Not all of this you said, right?
I don't think so.
Okay, because it's more than
Yeah,
the rest.
yeah. We'll put it in there and see. We'll stir it around.
Is this the same way you would use to do that one you talked about?
The ginger? No, because the ginger, I'm not putting in a nut butter base. The ginger is just ginger powder and honey, because they're little pill balls. Those are little balls.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is like a candy nut butter ball. Yeah, and they're used differently. It's just that's another delivery system, like making these little pill balls that you can So sometimes I make them for sore throats, and they're so much better than any cough drop you're going to buy. Just take like a little licorice powder. If it's a really infected throat, I might add a little golden seal to that, licorice, and mix it, and maybe a little warming like cinnamon, and I mix it up with honey into a really thick paste. Thicken it more with a little carob or a little cacao, though in a sore throat brand I use carob because it's medicinal, and then add a tiny bit of peppermint oil, and then you have this delicious throat ball. So it's different.
Have that
Yep, it's in this.
in that one.
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's in there. And when I give the recipes, I definitely give them written out so it says proportions. It's just when I do it myself, I'm very dyslexic with numbers, and sometimes when I try to use measuring cups and stuff, I just get confused. So it works better for me this way. Okay, so we're going to stir that up really nicely, and then I do just a quick little taste to make sure. Yeah, but I think we should add another little bit of honey, maybe.
The rest of it?
Yeah, the rest of it. You were right, Betty. It needs to be. I need it to taste sweeter than the finished product because of the bitterness that I'm going to add to it. So when I taste it, it should taste a little sweeter than I want it to be, right? And then I'm going to start adding my herbs to it.
I asked her, should I heat this up? Oh no, it'll be fine. I can't get it up.
Oh, well, whatever you can get out is good, Betty. Oops. Okay. And so when you make this formula, you just want to think basically of what the intent is. And then the other thing is, especially if you're making this as a medicinal formula that you want somebody to take. And I used these examples last time, is my mom would take anything I gave to her. She was very compliant, and we kept our mom alive and healthy for a long time. She passed away. My sister and I took care of her the last few years of my mom's life, which was an honor for us. She passed away at 97. She was a really marvelous human being.
Was at 92, she actually got cancer, and thanks to Rosemary and all of her.
Yeah, she sailed through it, honestly. It was amazing.
All
My mother
her
had rectal,
treats.
yeah, she had rectal cancer, and she did opt in with her family support for radiation treatment, but she was 92 years old, and we gave her a ton of herbs, kept her, and she really, we could say, sailed through her treatment. She had 11 weeks of treatment every day, 5 days a week.
34 treatments.
And she really, I would say, because of the herbs that we were using, she was able to eat. She had very little nausea. She'd still want to go to the thrift stores, which was her pleasure in life, So it was really good. And then she lived for several years after that in really good health. So yeah, it was pretty amazing to see. So if any of you are dealing with cancer or know people who are, there's an excellent book that came out by a clinical herbalist just this last year called Holistic Treatment of Cancer. It's written by, it's an excellent book. So it's written for both laypersons and then also for professionals who are doctors and also herbalists. And so there's 2 sections of the book. So, because sometimes those books are so complicated. And it's by Chantel Cabrera. She's a clinical herbalist who lives on Vancouver Island. And it's published by Storybook publication. I think it's called Alternative Treatments for Cancer. So look it up under the author Chantel Cabrera, Cabera, and Storybook publication. Yeah. So anyway, so here we go. So the first is your nut butter base. Now we're going to add our herbs, and we're going to add a little ashwagandha. So these names are going to sound really unfamiliar to you, but they're really common plants. This has a long-term history, 5,000 years of written history of being used as an adaptogenic tonic. It's one of the major herbs used in traditional Ayurvedic medicine from East India, and it's also used in Western medicine. It can grow really easily here. I would say we grow it in New England without problems, and so you can cultivate it. It's a member of the Solanaceae family, same family as tomatoes and potatoes, etc. And it's a root that's used. And then we're also going to add, that's the guarana and cola, rhodiola. So rhodiola is a plant actually native to northern United States and also places like the Himalayas and Siberia. It's a beautiful succulent, has a long history of being classified and used as an adaptogenic herb for restoring vitality and energy. It's one of my favorite adaptogens, actually. Look at all that herb that we're going to put in there. Yum, 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 we're going to use. And then eleutherococcus, which is a Panax, belongs to the same family as ginseng. Unlike ginseng, it is not a taproot, it's a large shrub. Grows very easily, it's from Siberia, by the way, grows very easily in Vermont, which is a little bit like Siberia. If you live in a cold weather climate, you'll be able to grow it. It's fairly fast growing. It's a big shrub, and it grows a huge root, and it's the root that's used, but you don't have to kill your plant. You can just take sections of the root. So we're going to add eleutherococcus to this formula, blow a little bit into the air. And what else are we going to add that I have here?
Chocolate.
Well, we'll add the chocolate. And then, well, because I have a little bit of ginger and cinnamon, we'll just add that for nice warming. We'll add these herbs too, ginger and cinnamon. Cinnamon, you know, is a regulator for blood sugar in the body. Has tremendous amounts of studies and research about that. It also helps to, it's a warming circulatory herb, and it's good for digestion. So it's a really nice herb. And it's also a mucilage. So it has that soothing mucilaginous effect. And then what else do we want to add that I have here? Okay. And then we're going to add the guarana and cola, which are the plants. So guarana, both of these are sustainably harvested. Cola comes from a hard nut that comes from Africa, and guarana comes from Brazil. And they cultivate the guarana trees there, actually, so it's very cultivated. They're both hard nuts, and both of them are very high in caffeine. So if there's anybody who doesn't...
Don't take them at nighttime.
Yeah, Betty said, she didn't sleep very well last night, yeah. So
I took it at here yesterday at the demo. So.
Yeah. If any of you are sensitive to caffeine and don't want to use them, we can make yours without them, but they're a little boring without... I always say it's like your balls without the zoom, right? It's nice to have the zoom in your balls. You can have balls, they should have zoom. So, and you can take that wherever you want, but I didn't mean it the way that you're thinking. So, oh God, I'm going to get myself in trouble here. Yeah. So, they're really excellent for increasing blood flow to the brain. So a lot of students and writers use a little bit of guarana and cola to help stimulate brain activity. So it's really excellent for that. But I do want to emphasize they're not everyday herbs. I would say, like, if you have to drive a long distance, you know, or you want to Yeah. And so we have about, 30 people here? So I want to say half a teaspoon for each of you. So we'll put...
measuring really well.
Yeah, I'm measuring really well. There we go. That's about right.
Looks perfect.
That looks good. We'll give a little more. Now we'll give you an extra zoom. There you go. So, yeah, that's going to be pretty good. Okay, now we're going to... So that's the second part. The first part is your nut butter base. Second part is your herbal formula. And then the third part is let's make the candy taste good. So you add things that taste really good to you. So that might be like, I like toasted coconut in it. It's so good. Chopped up walnuts, really fine. You can add goji berries, which are another adaptogen, or raisins, cranberries. You can add chocolate chips. So we're going to add a little bit of whatever we have here. I have a little bit of chocolate chips. We're going to put that in there. Add a whole jar. Oh God, I forgot to take the... Did anybody not want the caffeine? Sorry, I forgot. Sorry about that. Oh well.
You'll be zooming around for the rest of the day.
Let's see. And then we're going to add coconut. unsweetened, a nice unsweetened coconut. I didn't toast this, but when it's toasted lightly, it really adds a nice crunch to it. Yeah, I'll add a lot. And then we're going to add, and so, you know, and then if I had other things, if I had raisins or chopped nuts, I'd put them in there. But you have to remember, I put this together the last, you know, it was like midnight before I flew out.
Thank me.
Yeah. And then the last part is we want to make it really thick. And I do want to share, you can also, like if you're backpacking or traveling, you could add like, you know, granola, you can add powdered milk, not boring. You could add spirulina, you know, you can make them as nourishing as you want, but we're just basically showing you a good recipe. And now you need to thicken it so you can roll it into balls. And I have to thank Betty for this. For the last 30 something years, 40 years, I have hand rolled these. And then I roll them in, you know, coconut or chopped nuts so they look really nice. I've hand rolled them, or I had my students come up and hand roll, and Betty said, why don't you just use this? Oh my goodness.
And if you want to make it pretty, just put it, you know, your topping, your coconut or whatever, in a bowl and just take it after you scoop it.
Yeah.
And tip the top of it. It still looks pretty.
Yeah. So these are really handy. I hope she's going to give me one for Christmas.
Okay, and my apron probably.
So and now, so you can add if you were making these. I'm going to have to add the cocoa, honey. So you could. So the last step is thickening it. And so if I was making these medicinal, I would use carob powder, because carob has a bit of a chocolate-like flavor that's very high in mucilage. I know that's like comparing dandelion to coffee, right? Yeah. So it doesn't really taste like chocolate, but it's a really nice thing to thicken it when you're making these, like if you're making throat balls or if you have digestive issues, like for the ginger I would add carob. But here we're going to add a cacao, a raw organic cacao to thicken it. You can buy it anywhere. They sell them in grocery stores now, okay. Right? It used to be, it was very exclusive, but it's just so we're going to add that, and it's just enough to thicken it. Just enough to empty my bag. And so at this point, you do have to get your hands in and just really get it nice and thick. And if it does need a little bit more thickening, then we'll add, I do have, oh, this is hot chocolate with cayenne. We won't put that in there. I don't know what's in.
This is a great way to hide the herbs for people who don't want to eat herbs.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. Or also, it's not just hiding the herbs. The response was, this is a good way to hide the herbs for people who don't want to eat herbs. Yeah, it's an excellent way for that, but it's also just another way to deliver herbs. It's not good for acute situations because it's not going to work quickly in the body, but it becomes a food rather than a medicine. And the more we can do that, really that's where herbs are the most powerful, when we incorporate them into our daily eating, like in our juices and in our cooking and, you know, in our food. So it becomes more of a food than a medicine. And the more we do that, the better it is. Oh, that looks good.
Rosemary, how long can you keep them for? Like in the fridge?
Oh, now you don't need to refrigerate them. It's good to keep them in a pantry where it's cool because they're nut butters. But they last, you know, until you eat them all. That is, I would say that's the one danger of them, because especially if you're making them like medicinal balls or here guarana balls, you want to make sure that you keep them out of the reach of children, because I do remember this one story with my grandson. I knew there was a danger of my little Andrew getting into him, so I put the box up on the top of the refrigerator. He was quite little, and I was gone for a little while and came in, and literally he was like a little monkey swinging off the rafters in the house. I knew instantly when I saw him that he'd gotten into it, and he climbed up on the top of the counter and got into that box. And yeah, I think that's good, honey. We could add a little bit more, I think, to thicken them, but that's all right. Yeah, that works. So Betty is asking me, and so I would probably make them a little tiny bit thicker, but I just used all of my carob. I used all of my chocolate. I'm going to just show them how pretty they look when you put them in the, like a carob. Yeah, we'll put them in here. Do I have a little bit of coconut left in there? Yeah. Yeah, so when you roll them like this, they look so pretty. I just like to roll them in like something like coconut or... So this is kind of melting in my hands a little bit. So usually I make them thicker than this, but that's up to you. And you know, I was sharing this yesterday. I'm not going to go into the details. I'm not going to give you the recipe, but you can have a lot of fun with these balls. Like you can make aphrodisiac balls, you can make these wonderful Christmas presents. But when I was luring my husband, see, they look so pretty. And we had been dating for a while, and I made him the most fabulous aphrodisiac balls in the world. We've been happily married ever since.
But you're not sharing that recipe.
No, well, because that recipe actually had a few dangerous things in it that I wouldn't normally recommend. Yeah. No, it's because I can't remember what I put in it. It was one of those nights, late at night. I was playing around with my formulas, and I didn't. So you can see how pretty they look when you roll them. And yes, you can also have, like if you were making like a really wonderful adaptogenic or aphrodisiac or something, for fun, you can also dip these in dipping chocolate and have them be absolutely healthy for you. You can take an adaptogenic formula and dip them in dipping chocolate, or just in carob like this. This one's going to be hot because this chocolate I put cayenne in it. I'll eat this one.
I do something similar, Rosemary,
Oh.
but I blend up dates and coconut milk, and then I add all my herbs to it if you just don't want chocolate or nuts.
That's another excellent way. Oh, that's so good and hot. Anyway, we're going to make these for you, and you're welcome to come up. And I think my time is probably up. I want to thank you. Oh, it's overdue. I want to thank my sister.
They said to do.
Look at that. She's so good. I just can't believe it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, everyone.